Welcome back. Today we have some important information to review concerning Palantir stock. The first of which is a public Tableau Palantir ownership dashboard created by Chris Jones, who's a member of the Palantir community. You may recognize him from Twitter. I will leave his information and a link to this document in the description. I really want to thank him for putting together this tremendous resource that I'm about to show you. It's got all sorts of information for the institutional ownership of Palantir, all sorts of different ways that you can actually go about sorting the positions and the holdings and the institutions, and then you can see this is updated in real time, at least when the resources are available and when the 13F filings come out. This dashboard gets populated with that new information. So this is as of the second quarter for the information and the filings that we now have. And it's never going to be 100% correct. You'll be getting different numbers in terms of the institutional ownership from different outlets. Bloomberg might say something different from any other source. And Chris has put a lot of work into this, and I'm confident that it will yield accurate results over time, as well as being just a great place that you can go even if you don't have access to any of these paid sources. So again, very detailed. You can look at this on your own, but I want to jump on over to, there's also the mutual fund and ETFs as it loads in here. So the institutional ownership, as you'll see, is actually trending up quarter over quarter, which is great to see for Palantir, especially since, well, it's not great that the funds actually holding Palantir is decreasing. Even though we do have that decrease, we actually have an increase in the percentage of shares that are held by institutional owners. So what does that mean? Well, although we've seen a drop off from Q4 of 2021 with rebalancing into this year, we've seen a strong sell-off in all of the stocks and the stock market as a whole, especially the growth stocks. That's what I was referring to. We've seen Palantir's institutional ownership hold fairly steady, and this is actually the second highest quarter of institutional ownership, as you'll see, even higher than Q3 of 2021 and Q1 of 2022, coming in just slightly under the Q4 of 2021 when the market was much higher and more focused on long duration assets. So great to see Palantir institutional ownership at a near all-time high. Hopefully it continues to work its way upwards, and you'll see this really has been increasing over time, just even if you look since the company went public, having almost double the institutional ownership since that point. And then he throws in the put to call ratio, which is interesting to see. Usually you just have about the same puts as calls, but we've seen that Palantir's put to call ratio has actually been decreasing over time as the stock has been decreasing, potentially showing that when Palantir had a higher valuation, there was more interest in actually betting against the price, but now we've seen the put to call ratio basically return to 1. Doesn't really mean too much in my opinion, but it does show less of a willingness to bet against the stock, which is of course a great thing for investors that might not be so interested in the short term, but interested in a potential direction nonetheless. And so what else I want to show you here is some information that I'm able to pull from Tradietics Premium. Just a summary here on Palantir. I want to just get this information across. In terms of Palantir statistics, we're sitting at around $18 billion for a market cap. Here's the adjusted price to earnings ratio in terms of what Palantir is doing right now. Getting closer to that 2 billion mark in trailing revenue. We got 1.4 billion in gross profit, total cash at 2.46 billion, revenue per employee at almost 700,000, price to sales at around 10, price to book at a little lower than that, as you would expect with all their cash, at around 8, almost 2 billion shares outstanding, 677 institutional ownership in terms of millions of shares owned. That's actually coming in higher than what Chris is showing with his Tableau dashboard, but relatively in the same range. And we're going to get into short interest in a moment, but it's nothing crazy. The company beta, this is really what I wanted to show, is 2.22. So when the market moves by an increment of 1, Palantir will generally move by something more than double that. So interesting to see the beta, because sometimes it's you're not able to see it for a company that hasn't been public for that long. And I just wanted to show the price pairs and the price comparison between Palantir and ARK-K, because they do really move together given the basket of stocks that ARK Innovation is invested in. So here you will really see Palantir following what has been the story of innovation stocks for the past year or so, and the price pair has been fairly flat, meaning Palantir has really traded pretty in line with ARK Invest's picks of growth stocks. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And also to just take a look quickly at the analyst grading. Morgan Stanley with equal weight, Jefferies saying buy, Deutsche Bank saying sell, Citigroup with a sell, some others with neutral, Raymond James strong buy, Goldman Sachs neutral, Bank of America buy, RBC underperform, and Morgan Stanley equal weight. And then if we just have a look at the earnings, this is always interesting to see in terms of what Palantir delivers versus the expectations. So Palantir has been known to miss on their earnings per share when it comes time for the earnings release, and that has been especially true in the last 3 quarters, which does present a risk when it comes time for earnings, and that's why you see the stock week into earnings and week after earnings. And hopefully Palantir will be able to turn that around. That has primarily been due to the SPAC investments, which you can find here on the Chris Jones Palantir dashboard, as we looked at earlier. Now, this is really helpful because I was a little bit at a loss for where Palantir stands with this. Of course, you can dig into the filings, but it takes a lot of work. We have it all right here. Now, Palantir has been winding this down. They've been selling off some of their SPACs, as you can see here, with the Rotor and Lilium and Cellularity and Black Sky and MSP. So Palantir has actually had a percent ownership or two in some of these companies and now is selling some of them off. You see, for instance, they sold off 43% of their Lilium SPAC investment and 46% of their Cellularity. And we can go ahead and sort by market value here and do all sorts of things that you would come to expect from Tableau. And it's great because you can view this from any web browser, as well as download the information if you need it. So it looks like Palantir's SPAC situation is going to diminish over time, which I think is a good thing. I definitely didn't expect it to get as bad as it did, but it definitely turned into a risk for the company, as we were just looking at for the earnings. And while sometimes you can take a big risk like that and have it pay off, Palantir being a public company definitely has more risk when it comes to these short-term earnings releases, especially when you're paying your employees in stock. The stock needs to be performing well, which it has not been. So if Palantir can turn that around, it should help the core business as well. Some other useful information, this monthly seasonality isn't going to be too helpful because Palantir has not been public that long, but the weekday seasonality is fairly interesting. We see here on the win rate for Mondays is around 48%, Tuesday 46%, Wednesday 44%, and Thursday 48%, Friday with the lowest at under 44%. Again, not terribly helpful, but if you're thinking about when you could expect weakness for Palantir, when you could look to buy, it's likely going to be a Friday. This obviously varies to a large degree, but what I find interesting is that all of these are actually under 50%, so Palantir over its lifetime has decreased more than it has increased, and we know that based on the share price, but just wanted to point that out as well. Might be interesting for some of you, might not be interesting for others, but Palantir's short interest has never actually been very high. So you'll actually see the highest short interest in this time period that we're seeing here was actually back on the earnings day, August 8th of 2022. And short interest was about 1.2%, so nothing crazy. And it seems to have diminished after earnings, shorts taking profits along the way. And now we're sitting at 1/3% for a short interest that we have right now for Palantir. So definitely not room for Palantir to run on a short squeeze of any kind, but that could come into play if the stock gets hammered down by shorting in the future. Does not look like that is the case currently, and I wouldn't really expect that to be the case going forward based on it looks like there's not much short interest, which is fairly indicative that Palantir is under its fair value and there's not much more for it to go down, at least in terms of a risk reward for a short play. That's how I read that. So that's the update here. We've got institutional ownership trending back up again. even with a decrease in the funds holding. So that means the conviction of the funds that still hold is increasing, as well as the concentration of the Palantir position, which I think is a great thing. We'll have to continue to monitor this in real time as these 13Fs come out in the quarters to come. We have this resource now, wanted to make it as widely available as I could with this audience. Hopefully all of this information was helpful. I'll catch you in the next video. Until next time.